How many of you have been to Iceland?
The airport.
Great. You need to silence your cell phones during this presentation. And I just wanted to let you know about a couple of upcoming programs. This Saturday, we have National Theatre Live, British theater, the best of it, and we are showing the importance of being earnest. That is at 2 o'clock, and that is in the Arkell Pavilion here on the campus. Tickets are $20. And then on Tuesday, March 11th, we have Andrew Douglas from the Bryn Mawr Film Institute. This will be a Zoom-only program, and his talk is From the Sound of Music to Midnight Cowboy, What Happened to Hollywood. He has done a number of film talks for us, which are really very interesting, and I hope you'll join us for that. That's at 5:30 on March 11th. And then next Thursday, March 13th, we have Walker Kamek from the Smoky House Center. His talk is How Climate Change is Affecting Vermont's Maple Syrup Industry. That will be held here at the Southern Vermont Arts Center, and that is at 5:30. Our guest this evening is the Brown Professor of History and Faculty Affiliate in Arabic Studies, Leadership Studies, and Religion, and the Chair of Global Studies at Williams College. He specializes in the modern Middle East, specifically the political and cultural history of Hashemite Iraq from 1921 to 1958. He earned his BA degree in theology and political science at the University of Iceland. Prior to coming to Williams in 2003, he taught at Hofstra University for 4 years. He gave a talk for Green Mountain Academy several years ago on Iraq, and we're happy to have him with us again this evening. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Magnus Bernitz.
Hello, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for coming here tonight, and thank you to the Green Mountain Academy for organizing this event, and they also made it suitably cold for you outside. They had it icy and snow for you, so you can go in. It's like a nice summer day back home. But actually, I checked. Tomorrow, it will be warmer in my hometown than in Manchester. I don't know if that's good news or bad news, but that might say a lot. So I'm going to talk to you about Beyond Fire and Ice, about Iceland. And so I'm not an expert on Iceland, but I happen to be from Iceland, and so I happen to know a little bit about it. And also, I taught a course last spring at Williams College where I teach about Icelandic history. And it was sort of a curious course because most courses, history courses, or most history books are about big events and war and violence and sort of major events, about lots of people doing lots of things. But what about a place where nothing happens, where there's no war, very little violence, and people are generally peaceful? And there's a very famous quote from Montesquieu who says, happy a nation whose history is dull. So, so yes, very few things have happened in our country, but that makes us maybe more content, a little content. But that doesn't mean that nothing of interest has happened in our country. So even though this is a country where nothing really has happened, we actually do have a long, proud history. And there are some very peculiar things about us that I think maybe raises larger questions about what it means to be modern today. What is the relationship between modern society and the ancient past? What is the role of religion in contemporary society? And then also a country like Iceland that really didn't change a lot for 1,100 years until the 20th century. How is it dealing with the 21st century and the kinds of changes that are in front of us? So here are some of the broader questions that I would like for us to think about. So maybe the first thing is sort of, what makes Iceland Iceland? And we are sort of a little bit worried because there's another country up north called Greenland that's been in the news a lot. And often people confuse us, so we're a little worried that some people might be confusing Greenland with Iceland. So today we're going to talk about Iceland. And so the thing that we're going to be focusing on, because our country draws its name from nature, we're called Iceland. And so you can sort of say, I'm not saying that nature clearly determines who we are, but there's a great degree how nature has really impacted who we are. It has limited what we're able to do, and then also how it has impacted our culture. And then another thing that is maybe unique about us, which is how can a small country, a really insignificant country in the grand scheme of things, how can we remain independent? How can we be unique in any way? And how can we should we maintain that uniqueness in the 21st century? And should a small country exist? Does it make any sense? It's not very efficient, to have a country governing itself in this way. So why not join something bigger, and so forth? And then there are some very distinct contradictions in our country. And like all countries, we have some very interesting myths about ourselves and some narratives that we talk about ourselves, like any other country, that are mostly untrue, but we really believe that they are true. But this is our self-image of ourselves. We believe ourselves to be peaceful because we don't have a military. We have a police force, but basically the police force of Manchester, Vermont could probably come in and take over. Don't tell them that. But we don't have a military. We are part of NATO, so we are protected. And because we don't have a military, we view ourselves as being peaceful. We have not attacked anyone. We were not a colonial power. We were just minding our own business for 1,100 years. We view ourselves as being very creative. We view our country as being very special. It's very unique. It's very beautiful. But we also feel that we work very hard and we play very hard, and we like to take risks. But we also have an inferiority complex, because we're small. Nobody really knows where we are, who we are, and so on and so forth. So we always have to bang our drums a little bit. So when Gloria asked me, will you want to give a talk about Iceland? I said, sure! People actually want to learn about Iceland because we have this inferiority complex. Now, outsiders were we think everybody knows a lot about Iceland, but in fact, most foreigners really do not know anything about Iceland. They hardly know where it is. And if they have an image of it that's sort of quaint, it's maybe barbaric, that Icelanders are maybe somewhat strange and shy. And also, we are known not to plan particularly ahead because, for a number of different reasons, because we used to base our economy on fishing. And when you base your economy on fishing, you don't know how much fish you're going to catch. So why plan ahead? Because you might not catch anything. So that's why we are, yes, precisely. And so, for example, a good example of not being very good at planning, in 1986, Reagan and Gorbachev decided to meet for a nuclear summit, and they decided to meet in Reykjavik. And they gave us basically 3 weeks advance notice. And we got it done, organized it. But if they had given us a year notice, we wouldn't, probably just started it, 3 weeks before. And so because we don't plan ahead. And then this confusion, Iceland is green, Greenland is ice. And the myth is, and there's some literary evidence that this is true, that the myth is, that this was the first PR stunt, because when the first settlers came into Iceland in the 9th century, the myth was that these were all kings that were fleeing. There was this centralizing force in Norway who wanted to unite Norway under one kingdom under his rule. So all the small kings went to Iceland, and they wanted this whole place for themselves. But they said, let's call this Iceland to keep people away. Then somebody went over to Greenland and said, oh, let's name it Greenland, so to attract people. So this was one of the first, because Iceland is way more greener than Greenland, and Greenland is more icy. So this is maybe the first PR stunt. Anyway, the thing that is maybe most important for you to know is about our identity is that we are really shaped by nature, and nature really shapes us. And in order to survive on this frozen tundra, it has taken a lot of work to really eke out a living in this country. Maybe what's also characterized as a country is there has been a large degree of religious homogeneity in our country up until 1980. By definition, everybody was basically Protestant since the Protestant Reformation. But what's also interesting is that at the same time, it's very secular. The third thing that is maybe the most important thing, and Iceland is an example of a country that has a linguistic-based nationalism. We take our language very, very seriously. We take it even more seriously to some extent than the French in terms of how important, how we monitor it and surveil it and ensure that everybody speaks proper Icelandic. So if you want to be an Icelander, you have to speak Icelandic. And that might say, oh, then anybody can become Icelandic because theoretically anybody can learn the language. Yeah, sure, because it's a very difficult language and it takes a while for people to gain full fluency. So in some ways, it's a form of inclusion, the language, obviously, but it's also a way to exclude other people. So it's similar to other forms of national that are based on blood or religion and so on and so forth. It is something that is very important to us. And we see, the reason we are Icelanders and not Danes or Norwegians or Irish is because of our language. That really defines our culture. I think because we have nothing that happened on our island, we are very aware of what has happened on our island. And nobody really cares what happened to on our island except us. So therefore, we have to make sure we write our own history and repeat our whole history and tell our own stories and tell our children where we came from, because nobody else is going to do that. And so that's why I think in some ways we are good storytellers and sort of good historians in a way, because we know that is our incumbent upon us. And finally, maybe this is because of the weather, or maybe because there was nothing else to do in the winter, that there's a great appreciation of creativity. And everybody has written a book. Everybody plays an instrument. Everybody's in a choir. Everybody's writing poetry. Everybody's it's just like you just feel it, that there's this creativity. And maybe it's because of the weather. It's just like the weather is like inspires you and the nature inspires you, but it's really striking, the high level of creativity. And I'll explain maybe soon how that might be the case. But anyway, so these are some of the things to keep in mind. What is Iceland? The language, the nature, and being small, and finally, being an island. That's a very unique thing to be an island. And there are some islands in this world, like Great Britain and Ireland and Jamaica and Australia. So people on islands have a very specific view of who's in and who's out, and how oceans protect you, but also oceans are, wow, I want to sail the 7 seas. So what does it mean to be from an island? And being from an island as opposed to a landlocked country, you can sort of wonder, is there a difference between mentality and so on and so forth, and sort of who happens to come? So up until the 20th century, it was nobody came because it was like hard to get there. Whereas if you were living in Austria or Spain, people were coming through all the time, goods and services and ideas. So being an island, what does that really mean? And then finally, being small. Most of you, I assume, are from the United States. And so you sort of grow up that America matters and powerful and so on and so forth. But most countries of the world are small. And small nations behave differently than big nations. Small nations have to behave differently than big nations. And so therefore, small nations are great believers in the international system and international law and international organizations, because then small nations have a seat at the table. They're not listened to, but at least they have a seat at the table. And so therefore, small nations believe in international law and international organization. And small nations also seek shelter from stronger nations. So small nations are constantly looking at who's sort of the sugar daddy of the day, who should we sort of move into. And small nations are always making that calculation. And this is why these days, in the last 2 months, a lot of European countries are now like, what's going on? And who should we now look to? Who should we trust? Who should we follow in the current? It's very distressful, and it's very disorienting for a lot of small countries around the world today. But let's first talk about location, where we are. And sort of we are located in the North Atlantic. And as you can sort of make up we could spend all evening when you look at the spot where we are. We are in the middle of nowhere. And are we part of Europe, sort of geographically speaking? Yes. But we're also, geographically speaking, part of the Americas, because it goes right through, the grid goes right through us. So we're sort of halfway between the Americas and Europe. And so that for us makes us sort of with one foot in both continents. But we're sort of way up north, sort of the latitude of our capital, Reykjavik, is basically the same latitude as Anchorage, Alaska. So just to give you a sense of how north we are. And the only reason we've been able to survive for all of these centuries is because of the Gulf Stream. That sort of makes it slightly more livable. But we are a relatively new country from a geological point of view, because we're on the North Atlantic Rift. And what really characterizes our country is that the country is constantly changing because of the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions. My mother lives in an apartment, and she's like, from her window, she can see like a volcanic eruption sort of every year. And that's just sort of very normal. And So it's a country that's on the move, constantly changing, and sort of in between Europe and the North America. So the North American plate and the Eurasian plate. So this is sort of what characterizes our country. Here is literally a national park called Thingvellir, where our parliament was founded. And there you can, that is where the actual plates meet. You see that sort of. And this is where you can go and put one foot in America and one foot in Europe. And maybe symbolically, these rifts are moving apart by like a millimeter per year. So Europe and America. But this is a national park right now, and I was a park ranger there for a few summers when I was a teenager. Now we're entering the ooh and the ah part of the lecture. I'm going to show you some landscapes just to sort of emphasize why this country is very distinct, very different. It doesn't look like other European countries just from a natural point of view. Because it looks like lunar, and it's no surprise that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin came to Iceland in the early 60s to practice walking as if they were on the moon, just to sort of get a sense of being in a desolate environment where there's nobody around. And here are some unusual landscapes. As you might notice, we don't have many trees, and that's something that trees have not generally grown easily in our environment. So it's a very sparsely and desolate country. We have this combination of sort of volcanoes and glaciers together, so that combination of the fire and ice. But what is really remarkable that in this cold country, one of the things that is now we're seeing is such an asset is that we have so much hot water, natural hot water. My grandfather was born in 1911, and he grew up not in a heated house. So it wasn't until the 1930s where houses started to get warmed up. And so he grew up until he was in his 20s being cold all the time. And whereas my parents, born in the 1930s, they grew up in plenty of warm environments. So they had a completely different upbringing. We never had to worry about cold. And in fact, because hot water is so plentiful and cheap, that our houses are generally way warmer than they are here, and people in the middle of the winter sleep with their window open because it's good to get fresh air, because we don't really worry about heating costs in the winter. Plus, we have a lot of sort of natural pools. Here's the sort of view of Reykjavik, our capital, on a cold, bitter day. And as you can see, there's no pollution, no oil heat, because everything is heated up by water. And so that makes for less pollution. And because of our hot water, going to swim and is a very popular thing. This is a very communal thing. This is where if you want to hear the latest gossip or the news or whatever, or if you're running for office, you go to the swimming pools, and because that's where people are. But that's also when people ask you, isn't it cold to live in Iceland? Yeah, but you feel warmer because of how we heat our houses and sort of these very hot spas and hot tubs that people often have in their homes. Here's Iceland has really upped its spa game in the last 10 years and sort of started to take advantage of the extensive hot water in very unique settings. This is perhaps the best well-known, called the Blue Lagoon. Anyway, I was going to give you some facts, so let's talk about some facts. So we have our population of our country is about 360,000 people. It's a small country when it's to the nearest 1,000 or nearest 100. And so we are the 177th largest country in the world. So basically 360,000 people, it's basically the same as Toledo, Ohio, or Corpus Christi, Texas. I don't know if that helps you, but that gives you a sense. Those are not considered major US cities, but you've heard of them. But that's the size of our country in terms of population. So America has about 360 million people. So for every one Icelander, there are 1,000 Americans. So it's the equivalent of you now listening to 1,000 professors at once. The size of our country is, it's a fairly large country. It's basically the size of Kentucky in terms of square miles. So that means we have a lot of land, but not very people. So that it's not very densely populated. So we were settled in the 9th century in 874, and what is very unusual about us is that there was no indigenous population. There were some Irish monks living there. We don't know why, but those monks obviously did not, produce people. We didn't have. There's no evidence of any indigenous populations. So when we settled, it was sort of like new land. We became Christian in the year 1000, and as opposed to other places in Europe or Africa or Asia for that matter where Christianity arrived, it was a very peaceful event. And Thingvellir, where I showed you earlier where the tectonic plates meet, that was where the parliament was, and there were some pagans and some new Christians. They came to the parliament to decide whether we should be Christian or pagan. And they asked an old man, and he said, well, let me think about it for 3 days. So he thought about it for 3 days and said, okay, I think we should all be Christian, but you can be pagan in private. And people said, oh, okay. And then everybody went home, and that was it. So we became Christian in the year 1000. Then we were a Norwegian and later a Danish colony. So technically we were colonized. Compared to the history of colonialism, we had it quite easy because there was really nothing for the colonizers to take from us. We didn't have anything of value. We had a few sheep, we had some fish, but nothing. Yeah, they left after we came in. But basically, nobody came until, but then finally in the 19th century, some Icelanders decided, oh, maybe it's unnatural to be dominated by a foreign king, so we started this independent movement. And then we became sovereign in 1918, right after World War I, and then right smack in the middle of World War II, when actually, interestingly, Denmark was occupied by Germany, we became independent. But we became independent because we had made a deal already. And so we became independent right in World War II, and that since then we've been an independent state. So we're a relatively newish country, independent sort of from a political point of view, but independent from like a cultural and psychological point of view since the 9th century. So this is our flag, and it's the most beautiful flag in the world. And what you might notice of it is sort of in your face, yes, there's a cross. So there's not like trying to like be quiet about it. But of course, our flag is part of the sort of the Nordic family. So you have Finland and Sweden and the Åland Islands and Denmark and the Faroe Islands. We all have crosses in this is sort of our signal to the rest of the world that we have sort of this kinship together. We have sort of shared culture, and we are Christian. And for us, our flag also symbolizes, the red crosses symbolizes the volcanoes, and the white symbolizes the glaciers, the ice, and the blue symbolizes our plentiful water. So very nice. Interestingly, since Greenland has been in the news, you should look at the flag of Greenland. Because when Greenland became sovereign, they designed a flag, and everybody in the Nordic sphere expected them to have a variation of this theme. But lo and behold, Greenland devised their own flag. And their theme, their flag is a variation of the Japanese flag. It's a red, white circle, and so it doesn't have a cross. And so for the Greenlandic people, kudos to them. They said, okay, we're not part of you, we're part of something else. And that just goes to show how sort of independent where they're going. Anyway, so we are sort of culturally, therefore, we associate with our sort of Nordic brothers and sisters, and indeed there's a sort of lots of Nordic cooperation. Our systems, economic systems, culture systems are very closely related. Our legal systems are closely to one another, and as I'll talk about soon, our languages are close, but you still have to learn the other languages. Like the first language I learned in school was Danish. And then I lived in Sweden for 2 summers, and then it was easy for me to learn Swedish, and then similarly easy to learn Norwegian. So you can sort of navigate those. Finnish, of course, is a completely different language, but these 4 Scandinavian languages are all Germanic languages, very similar. And as I will talk about soon, we still speak sort of the original Nordic language because nobody came, nobody bothered us. We were isolated. Our language did not we say get polluted, or they say did not develop. And since they were sort of closer to what was happening in Europe, their languages moved. Here's a picture that is quite remarkable, and this is sort of the population of Iceland from basically one of our earliest censuses to the years 2000. And sort of basically for a very long time, the population didn't sort of go up beyond 75,000 and then sort of finally hit 100,000. It seemed like the country could not sustain a larger population. When I was growing up, it was sort of starting to sort of hover around 200,000. And so that was like a drastic sort of post-World War II, like drastic sort of rise in the population. And now we are one of the rare countries in the sort of among the developed countries in the developed world, Western Europe, Japan, and North America, where there's a positive birth rate, sort of more than sort of 2 children per family. And so we have now, like our tree of population, we have like a healthy-looking Christmas tree. In terms of young populations will sustain the older populations, whereas countries like Germany and Japan have a negative birth rate, so they're very worried about the future and who's going to take care of the older people in the future. So we have had rapid population growth. We are a country that is having a lot of babies, yet at the same time we're also having sort of high life expectancy. So it's a country that has high natural fertility, and we will soon see high rates of immigration. We're also a country that generally scores very high. We're usually number 1, but not always, in the happiness index, where countries are asked, how happy are you, and so on and so forth. We really generally score very high on that. And that's because, generally our economy is quite good, our system is quite good. Nobody is really attacking us. Nobody really hates us. So we have really no reason to complain. And so therefore we tend to score very high on our happiness index. There might also be a linguistic feature here, because, for example, when you meet an Icelander, and in English you say, when you see somebody, you say, how are you? And in English, that's an invitation. You can complain. Say, well, my back is hurting or something. But in Icelandic, when you ask somebody, how are you, you say, what do you say what is good? Just, hvað segirðu gott? So just tell me something good. So when you see someone, sort of, how are you? The only answer is like, everything is great. So when somebody asks, are you happy? Yes, of course I'm happy. So I think there might be something related to that, but generally speaking, we are quite happy. Our GDP, we're generally always in the top 5 in terms of GDP, in terms of gross domestic product. So therefore we are doing very well economically. Like I said before, we're doing very well in terms of life expectancy because we have a very sort of generally good sort of healthcare system from the cradle to the grave. And we generally score the highest in the sort of global gender gap. So there's probably no country that is doing as well as far as equality and equity of the genders as in Iceland these days. And that has been a story over the last 30 years. That didn't happen overnight. That has been a sort of a long-standing battle. And so for right now, our head of state, the president, is a woman. Our main bishop is a woman. Our foreign secretary or the secretary of state is a woman. And our prime minister is a woman. So like and 2 out of the 4 main bank directors are women. So, and now all companies have to prove that they're paying for the same position and it has to be very transparent about it. So this index is good that we are at the top of the world in terms of gender equality. However, it's not full equality, and there's still a lot of work to be done. So one final thing, because we're so small, we like to use the per capita. Because we can never say we have the most poets or the most soccer players. But we can, if we divide it by per capita, then we do pretty good. So we have the most, here, we are the most peaceful country. We have the lowest murder rate per capita. We have the highest population of happy people per capita, highest interest rates, the second fattest nation in the world per capita. and the most authors, most books, and we use this all the time, the per capita thing. But let's now look at the language. And like I said, the Icelandic language for us is what is really, really important. And there used to be a much stricter rules related to citizenship. So if you became a citizen of the country, you had to take a quite hard language test, much harder than the equivalent American to become an American citizen. And up until 1990, if you became an Icelander, you had to change your name to an Icelandic name. You had to have a name that conformed to the grammatical rules of the country. And when I was growing up, I thought, yeah, of course. But now, like, wow, that is quite draconian, what people had to do. We have a committee that if a new phenomenon emerges, like computer or telephone, that it devises a new word for this. We don't just want to bring in a foreign word because we want to keep our language sort of pure. And like our word for computer is quite ingenious. Tölva, computer, and it's a composite noun, so they took the word for völva, which is the ancient prophetess. In the old sagas, the sort of like the mystical figure, the woman that would predict the future, was called a völva. And then a number is tala, so the thing that could predict numbers was the name of the computer, because yeah, makes sense. And now everybody uses tölva. Sími is an old word for line, and those terms, so nobody uses telephone, everybody uses sími, nobody uses computer, everybody uses tölva. So the country is very strict about that. There's also a book, not a very long book, in terms of the names that you're allowed to name your children. You can't have just full freedom. The idea behind that is that only certain names are grammatically correct, but it was also that people want to ensure that parents do not name their kids something that could hurt the kids growing up. So Hitler, Lucifer, or like, so you're protecting the child, and so therefore people have been fighting. I want to have the right to name my child, wind chimes, and so that's the battle where that is right now, but that's sort of an example of the centralized language policy. But people are talking about this a lot. This is now coming under somewhat of a siege because of growing immigration into the country, and now more and more people are sort of working in English. More and more of our workplaces are sort of international workplaces, and so to what extent does it make sense in the 21st century to have such strict rules about the language? And so on and so forth. As of right now, most young artists, like rappers and young writers, write in Icelandic and are very proud of it. But you can sort of see that if you want to be an international star, that will not go very far. And so therefore, more and more people are working now in English, and I can sort of sense that sort of the younger generations, their knowledge of English is way better than my generation, and their level of Icelandic is perhaps not as good, or at least it's evolving. Another thing that is unique about our country is that we have this patrilineal, patronymic system of naming. So here's my family. This might be a little bit confusing. Should I go on to the... So maybe I can just show it from here. So here you see my name. Is the mouse visible? Okay, I don't see it myself. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so maybe I'll just point. So here's my name, Magnús Þorkell Bernhardsson, and I am the son of Bernhard, my father, right? So Magnús Bernhardsson. And his name is Bernhardur Gudmundsson, because his father's name is Gudmundur Magnússon. And so you can see I'm named after my great-grandfather on my father's side, and my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side. So my father married my mother, Rannveig Sigurbjörnsdóttir, because she's the daughter of Sigurbjörn. And when she married my father, she still remained the daughter of her father, so why change the name to my father? That didn't make sense. So all through their lives, they had the same names. And then my sister is Svava Bernhardsdóttir, the daughter of Bernhard. And then me and my brother are both Bernhard's son. So we're a family of 5, and we had therefore 4 different last names. And so sometimes when we're traveling, for example, in Italy, I remember when I was a little child, they did not believe that we were the same family. And they did not allow my parents to sleep in the same room because they didn't think they were married. But so we use first names. So if you want to look in the phone directory or how we organize people, it's all by first names because that's truly what's important. Last name is inconsequential. And so that's how we organize ourselves. Yes, and yes. And this is how it was basically all over, except in bigger countries that said, this is harder to keep track of people in this way because we want to be able to tax them. But because we're so small, we just know. We just know who's who and who's related. And in recent years, this has become centralized. So I'll show you an example. We have this incredible database called the Icelandic book. And so I'm going to go onto that website and show you how I can sort of trace, figure out who I'm related to and by how much. And it's because we have these incredible records going back to the 10th century, and we have a centralized system. It's so easy to sell. So here I'll show you this, if you don't mind. Is that okay? It's called Íslendingabók, and the Book of Icelanders. And the top here says, "Við erum öll skyld," we're all related, it says. So then you log in, like I will do here. And then it comes here. And then it just asks gives you, here's like statistics about my family. This is common names in my family. But the fun part is that I can put in any Icelander and see how I'm related. For example, 5 years ago, Williams hired a new women's golf coach, Thomas Aðalsteinsson, who happened to be Icelandic. And both of us, before our first meeting, both of us like, well, I see. And then it turned out I'll look him up, Thomas Aðalsteinsson. So there are a few, let's see, he's born in 1983, here he is. So we are not that related. So he was 5th cousins with my grandfather. So we have a common ancestor from 1778. Of course, this can be very practical because you can have this in an app. If you meet somebody at a place, then you go, oh, how related are we? Then you can get in fact, there's an app, and if you're too related, it starts like, don't. So. But this is often for curiosity, but also if you are reading a history book, and they mention somebody in 1825, and you wonder, I wonder if am I related to that person? Then you get 2 seconds later, you can figure that out. And so this gives you a sense wow, we're all related, and how, yes, and so that is meaningful. So that's the naming system. We also have a very traditionally had a very strong, like many classical poetry, rules about writing, and here is a well-known little poem that everybody knows. And as you can see there's not only end rhyme, but you also have certain in rhyme and uses of certain letters. Like here, tækifæri gríptu greitt, so the GG in the first line, then there should be a G following in the second line. Tækifæri gríptu greitt, giftu mun það skapa. Járni skaltu hamra heitt, að hika samatapa. So there are all these rules that you have to follow if you're a poet. This is because, and this is our self-image, because we are what protected us, we feel, and made us unique is our sagas. Our literature from the 10th, 11th, and 12th century, which were written since we became Christian, about a pre-Christian period. And these were the tales of our our settlement and the subsequent centuries thereafter. Since these were written down and taken quite seriously, they maintained our language in a particular way. And so that is ensured that we protected our language in this way, and we felt these sagas really resonate to us. their descriptions of the landscape. They talk about certain farms, and if I would take you on a ride, I can show you that's the farm that is mentioned in Jarl Saga. That's Bergþórskál over there, that's mentioned in Egil Saga. These places still exist. The mountains that they mention, we know where those mountains are. These are great works of, great narrative, great epics, but for us they're like very local stories. And so for us, we are who we are because we are sort of people of the book, the people of the book of the sagas. And there are some great characters in these sagas because the hero is like a warrior, but also a sensitive poet. Like the best example is Egill Skallagrímsson, who Egil Saga is named after. He killed his first man when he was the age of 3. Yeah, in a hockey game. He did. So anyway, so that is some heritage. We, like I said, religion is somewhat omnipresent. This is one of our main churches in downtown Reykjavik, and it's sort of interesting architecture because it's made out of it's supposed to look like the basalt columns. As I said before, it's a state church, so when you're born, you're automatically registered to the denomination of your mother, and then when you grow up, then you pay taxes to that denomination. So this church or whatever, you can go to the census and register as an atheist, and if so, then your church tax goes to the university. So you can't sort of declare atheism to get out of taxes, but of course, the university also has a seminary that also supports so you can't really get out of supporting religion. But I mean, so there's a state church attendance on a given Sunday is very, very low, but I would say that about 98% of people get sort of buried in a church burial, and funerals are major events. Most people get confirmed, nearly everybody gets baptized, and so on and so forth. And Christmas and Easter are big holidays. So I would say sort of Icelanders are sort of culturally Christian, but not necessarily, fundamentally Christians. We also have a few superstitions. You probably have heard about this. I wouldn't say that we believe in elves, but some people maintain that they exist. And here's a road called Elf Mound Road, which is near where I grew up. And you can sort of see there's a strange swerve. The road was supposed to go straight through where that yellow house is, but people believe that in these years there's some elves lived. And lo and behold, whenever the bulldozers are going to go through, something happened to the bulldozer. Or the operator got sick that day. So that's why they swerved the road around. Some other tales, we have very interesting stories about on Christmas. We have 13 Santa Clauses. Each of them are mischievous. They come like 12 days before Christmas, and they do sort of various things. As a child, their mother is Grilla there on the and she eats naughty children. And so this was a great behavior modification device just before the holidays. And you put your shoes in the windows before Christmas, and if you've been a naughty boy or a naughty girl, you get a potato in your shoe, but if you've been a good boy or a good girl, you get something nice and sweet. So this is somewhat unusual for Christmas. Like I said before, valuing creativity. I think the Icelandic government puts a lot of emphasis on art. And if you if you go to Iceland, or if you start sort of paying attention, there's a high degree of very successful, I would say, Icelandic artists in the visual realm, in music, in writing, and so on and so forth, and sports. And that's because the government gives out subsidies. And for example, every year you can apply to get about $44,000 to be an artist per year. And that can be helpful for you to, I know it's not lots of money, but at least that's something. And so about 100 people get the grant. So this would just put this in comparison. Can you imagine if 100,000 Americans every year got about $50,000 to be artists? So that's about 2,000 per state. I mean, that would surely add to the cultural life of, say, Vermont, if you had 2,000 people in Vermont getting money from the government to make art. Then there's 25 people who get honorary, and then if you become a grandmaster in chess, then you get the equivalent of a teacher salary per year. So we really value, and we put a lot of money in it, but it's also, now we are seeing that there's some economic benefit to having a vibrant artistic scene. And like our symphony orchestra is very, very good, and a lot of good music in our country, and some international companies, especially sort of in the bioengineering, biochemical, and sort of those kind of realms, have said it's been easier to recruit people to come and live and work in Iceland because they come and say, wow, there's culture here, there's something to do, so I'd like to work here. So in some ways, it would be fascinating to see sort of the cost-benefit analysis of this when people say, oh, doesn't this cost much money? But yes, how much does this actually bring in? So Iceland has been a country that has been isolated, has been sort of homogeneous, has really sort of had a very clear identity of itself, has been sort of very impacted by very sort of a certain kind of nature that has really sort of forged who we are. In the 21st century, things have started to change a little bit. First, with climate change. Now we are experiencing very different summers and very different winters. What will that mean for our country, for our fish, for our birds, and sort of people living in the country? And we are seeing drastic changes of that. For example, in 2006, I went with my grandfather, remember the one who didn't grow up with warm water? He lived on a small farm in the eastern part of the country, and in the 1940s, his parents shut down the farm and moved to the city. And now you can just sort of see the ruins of where the farm was. And when I went with him, he said, okay, here's the house. And over there, you can sort of see ruins of where we kept our sheep. And from there, it was like a 300-meter walk to the sea. And now, the sea is basically at where the sheep were. So in his lifetime, he had seen drastic changes in his life. Now we sort of see trees everywhere. Birds that used to be in the south have now moved north. Sort of fish, certain kinds of fish that used to be over there have now moved over there. So we're seeing these changes drastically. We are seeing in our glaciers that we had officially a funeral for one glacier that ceased to be a glacier anymore. It sort of melted away. And so therefore people are saying within a few years we might need to change our name of our country to Brownland because there won't be any ice left in this Iceland. So what will that mean for our country? Then there's another change, is that we are seeing a massive increase of immigration into our country. And this immigration is primarily from Poland and the Baltic countries, people who have come in because we have needed people, for our tourism industry, for other forms of construction, and so on and so forth. And so therefore, when I was growing up, Catholics were maybe sort of 3% of the population. Now it's about 20% of the population because of the Polish and some of the Baltic, from the Baltic countries, and so on and so forth. So this is having a massive change in our society. And so it is sort of interesting to think about immigration in our country because we were not a colonizing force. So the people immigrating out of the country are not former colonized people coming to the metropole. We need people, and most of the people who are immigrating in are, like this graph indicates, from Europe, so they are not sort of racially, they do not stick out in some sort of very obvious ways, and we don't have sort of historic sort of neighborhoods where the immigrants live. So therefore, the story in Iceland is very different than, say, the story of immigration, say, in England or in France or, say, in Germany. And yet there are still some challenges in that area. But so far...
How does the general population feel about that?
So far, because we recognized that if we didn't have these people, who would be working in the hospitals and doing the construction and so on and so forth. Because we have negative unemployment, and the Icelanders say they are doing the jobs that we do not want to be doing, and generally the perception is that they are diligent, hardworking people, and so on and so forth. There's been, however, in the last 10, 15 years, a rise of, that if a crime happened in the downtown yesterday, and the radio would report, and a person of foreign origin was responsible for this crime. So people have started to phrase it in that way, and now there's been a request that not to, why does the origin of the criminal matter in this particular case? And we're trying to change our discourse, and this is also because these immigrants do not necessarily speak the language. And since many workplaces now that they have really no reason to get to know the language. But then the children go into the schools and they need to know the language. And so now it's starting to cause all these problems that, because this is just like in the last 10 years that all of these changes have been happening, and it's been happening, it wasn't like a small trickle like over 100 years, it's like so often happens, is like nothing, nobody came, and then all of a sudden like everything happened. And now the schools, the hospitals, the system is trying to like figure out, translation and how to maybe have multiple signs, because people come to the hospital and there are no signs, like where the emergency room, like, because I remember when the airport was opened up in 1986, someone said, maybe we should have a sign that says, this way to Reykjavik, to the capital. And Iceland said, why? Everybody knows where the capital is. And it's the same, like, yeah, I know, I've been to the hospital, I know where the emergency room, why do we need a sign? So like, we don't think that everybody isn't like, knows everything about everything. So it's starting now to, we're seeing that. And this is why it's sort of like a fascinating laboratory. This is what I said before, like a country that has been so homogeneous, peaceful, successful in the 20th century in terms of economic, has built up a very robust welfare system where people are generally happy, where there's equality and sort of plenty for everybody to do and so on and so forth. And now there's like, people are wondering, wait a minute, is this sustainable? And so that this is going to be a challenge moving forward, and that's sort of fascinating. I'm almost coming to an end, I'm sorry. And so this is just what I showed. This is such a rapid development, and therefore we don't really know how to sort of, how to think about it. When I was growing up, I can't stress how homogeneous the country was. I could literally name like anybody who was not Lutheran, not of the island since like the 10th century, like very clear. And I'm not exaggerating. But now that's no longer possible. So this is employment rate, and then this is, we have taken in a lot of refugees. I think we have one of the highest of all sort of OECD countries. We took in a lot of Ukrainians in 2022, and also Iraqi and Syrians in the late, sort of in the 2015, 2016 era. So we are a small country. We are a country that I think was one of the poorest, most miserable countries for about 1,000 years. Then we barely survived through World War I and World War II. And after World War II, we were able to sort of develop. And part of the reason why we're able to develop is because we became independent at the right moment. And second of all, the Marshall Aid came at like a really critical time for our nation. And thirdly, we had been during World War II, first there were about 50,000 British soldiers, and then about 75 to 100,000 American soldiers came to our island with only about 150,000 people, which created a lot of demand for services and so on and so forth. And when the Americans left after World War II was over, it wasn't cost efficient for the Americans to bring back all the trucks and bulldozers and so on, so they sort of left them behind. So for a new country to like, that was like, yes, it was really helpful. We would say it's because we were so successful, we were so strong and so smart, diligent, but we got a good boost, and that helped us move forward. Then finally, the thing that has helped us is that we're small and we're not threatened by anybody. So for example, in the 1970s, when the rules of the sea changed, the sovereignty of the seas changed from 5 miles to 200 miles, and therefore countries could fish. Prior to 1973, anybody could fish in our waters, and after 73, we had to go 200 outside. And England had been fishing in those waters for centuries, and all of a sudden they were told, you're no longer, these seas, the 200 miles belong to Iceland. And Her Majesty's Navy, England, I mean, of course they could have just like come in and taken over a country, because if they wanted to fish, but because we're so small and sort of non-threatening, and we had the law on our side, Britain said, okay, we will allow you to fish in our country. We will abide by that and not go to war over this. And I wonder if we had been bigger and maybe more of a threat to England, if they would have tried to make, this would have been a bigger thing. If, nobody bothered to live where we are because there was nothing of value. So there was not like a Falkland Island situation or anything of that nature. So therefore, we have benefited from that. But people are really wondering about the future of Iceland. What will it be in the future because of these threats to the climate, to the environment, to sort of, does it make sense to be so vigilant and sort of protective of our language? And then finally, in this sort of world of globalization, will people not sort of care so much about the ancient past or the sort of more recent past as we have done recently? So on that happy note, I'm happy to take it up if you have questions or concerns. Yes, in the back?
Yeah, hi. Both my daughters have been to Iceland within the last 5 years.
Yes.
And they said, it's very touristy now.
Yes.
Very, very popular. Is that a big part of your economy?
Yes. It's a major part of our economy right now, and so that really helped us after the financial crash in 2008. And that sort of after that, we had a huge rise in the economy. But it's also, it is certainly has changed the cities, and there are now more restaurants, hotels, and sort of more things to do. But it's also because most, and I'm sure your daughters could do, the reason you want to go to Iceland is because of the nature and the pristine nature, the beauty, and sort of the, and then if it's, hiking, and if it's filled with tourists, that's a different kind of experience. And so we have to now think about, should we try to control it? Should we do it like Venice or Amsterdam? Should we try to have a quota or to some extent? But it has certainly been a very positive economic boost to the country. Being a country that depends on tourism, it's sometimes you can turn into a caricature of yourself if you're always like selling yourself to foreigners, and like you start to then talk about stereotypes and so on and so forth, and sort of you're not then, and most tourists, because of time and other things, don't sort of get to experience the authentic thing, and so we might sort of promote other things that is maybe just easier and less complicated. So, but it's been very helpful economically. It has provided us with sort of new opportunities, but I worry about sort of long-term impacts on other things. But when you go down to Reykjavik, it's hard to meet another Icelander, and because we are only about 360,000 people, but almost 1 million tourists come per year. So like it's being overwhelmed by it. But it's so far the infrastructure is keeping up, but it's you can sort of see it could reach a breaking point. Yes?
Also, what I've heard with tourism, my sister lives in Iceland.
Oh,
And
yes.
has been there for many years.
Yes.
That now it's almost, the Icelanders can't afford to do the hiking and the taking in at the little Airbnbs or whatever.
Yes.
Because the prices is for tourists.
Exactly, or to go fishing or anything of like things of that nature that used to be sort of anybody could do. Now it's basically just cheaper to fly to Spain, have a vacation, go to the Canary Islands rather than to be enjoy the benefits of your own country. And so yes, real estate prices have gone up, and so many of my friends who have kids in their like late teens to mid-20s, they can, sort of university age, they cannot afford to live except at home because of that, those pressures. Yeah, so that's another dimension to this. Yes?
I heard something about Iceland that I think was in the 2000s when it was prior to the 2008 financial breakdown worldwide.
Yes.
That Iceland was leading the world in financial engineering or
Yes.
financial work. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because they were actually ahead of their time, but I think something bad happened at the 2008 crash.
Yes. So this is when I said in the beginning that we don't plan very well. We're sort of risk takers, and there was we really embraced that sort of that new economy of the early 2000s. There was, and I think there was some parts of that some of these Icelandic banks became quite aggressive, and they did buy actual assets. And so the problem was not, they were sort of heavily leveraged, and then they became bankrupt, but it was more a question of liquidity. I think if the timing had been different and if the whole world wasn't in a liquidity crisis, maybe they would have gotten out of it. What was maybe though interesting, so that was a very spectacular crash, and prior to that you can sort of see it coming. But what was also interesting was the reaction. So what happened after the crash? And so first of all, the banks were not nationalized. They were just made to go bankrupt. And then you just use the same sort of bankruptcy to sort of deal with the creditors and so on and so forth. Second of all, I don't remember the exact number, but it was, I think, 10 to 15 bankers went to jail. And so that's the equivalent of 15,000 bankers going to the jail in the United States. And so there are people who were held responsible for their actions. From a legal point of view, because we're small, what was maybe even more terrifying for them is that everybody knew who they were, and so they couldn't go swimming or they couldn't go to the child soccer game because everybody was. So they were sort of. It was such a general crash, so people took that to heart. So I would say it was interesting, sort of yes, how they were able to leverage this new economy, but I think it's also the response to and calling for responsibility is almost as interesting, if not more interesting, sort of dealing with the aftermath. So we'll see if for the next bubble, whether we will sort of be in the same steps as well. But yes, it was. They were trying to be sort of like a financial center, financial engineering, and some of it did work, and others obviously did not. Yes?
Does Iceland have what they regard as a national sport that they're particularly proud of?
Yes, so we have one that is sort of like a form of wrestling. That is sort of a standard one, and it has been sort of an exhibition sport on the Olympics. But then there are two major sports. Soccer has become quite big, and we were very successful in the Euros and made it to the World Cup. We're the smallest country to make it to the World Cup in 2018. And then there's another sport that we really love that is not well known in the United States. It's called team handball. And it's similar to water polo, except you play it sort of on a court. 7 versus 7, you throw a ball, and it's an Olympic sport. And we got a silver medal in the Beijing Olympics. And so we have the most silver medals per capita. Per capita. So those are the main sports. Skiing is not great in Iceland because there's very few times where you have the combination of good weather and good snow. And our problem in Iceland is not so much the coldness, like probably your sister knows, it's the wind. And the wind is, we have so many words for wind for good reason. Because and that's what, for skiing and outdoor sports, that's usually the issue. So I would say soccer and team handball, and then maybe third place chess. Yes?
There was a lot of news coverage about a volcano.
Yes.
Not too long ago.
Yes.
And I remember a number of years ago, another volcano that erupted and put a lot of ash in there.
Yeah.
How do Icelanders handle volcanoes?
Yes. Yeah, so because of where we are living, we know that this is sort of a regular feature of our life. And And so the ones that was in 2010 that had that long name, Eyjafjallajökull, it was an unusual eruption because the ash was so fine that at that point the engines of the planes, they couldn't handle that ash. And I think now they might be able to. Second, what was unusual was this cloud was very thick, and then usually because of the Gulf wind, the wind goes from south to north. So generally it would have like blown it over to the North Pole, but for whatever reason those days there was very little wind, so it just stayed there. Right in that sort of where most transatlantic flights fly sort of in Icelandic sort of air territory. And that prevented it. So it shouldn't have been this serious. But we have these active volcanoes, and like there's the one that has been now erupting near the airport and near the Blue Lagoon, which my mother can see from her apartment. It's like maybe 40 kilometers from Reykjavik. It's manageable. It has caused the evacuation of one small village of 4,000 people. Nobody has died. We take it very seriously. The biggest sort of rock stars are sort of people who are geologists and meteorologists, and because we really pay attention, they have all these advanced warning systems. So we take it very seriously, and we monitor it quite closely. But it's not like an existential crisis. We just know that this is something that we have to deal with. But one of my ancestors from the eastern part of the country, he witnessed the 1783 eruptions, and he wrote about it. And his name was Jón Steingrímsson, known as the fire clergy. And it's a very good account of what happens to animals and other things in such a kind of fire, and it was very poisonous. And that's the cloud and the dust, the ash from that eruption made it all the way to Mongolia and to Egypt. And so, there's a possibility that such an eruption could happen again that could then have an impact globally. But yeah, it's a part of our sort of environment. We take it in stride. We take it seriously. There are very strict rules in terms of building houses, what kind of to withstand earthquakes, and I think that is part of the unpredictability of living on that island. Yes.
How did Iceland, being a small island, manage the pandemic?
Yes, so I think fairly well, because we were an island. It was easy to sort of close everything off, and then there was I think people trust the system, and every day there were 3 people giving updates. It was sort of the Surgeon General, the Minister of Health, and the person who would be like the national security advisor. And all of them are sort of trained scientists, and they took charge, not the politicians. And so therefore it was never politicized. And so I think our numbers were just sort of pretty good, not amazing, and so on and so forth, but because we're an island and we're small and we have easy communications and we know where everybody is, it was easy to sort of keep that in line. So I think it came out pretty well. And then what was sort of to talk about tourism, because no tourists came, but we had all this infrastructure. And then people really started to sort of explore their country in a real way that they hadn't really done before. Because when you're living on an island, and you want to go on vacation, your tendency is to leave somewhere. And so now people really, so I think there was a greater appreciation of who we are and where we are that came at that moment. So that was sort of a short moment. Yes?
To continue on that, I know so many people that right after 2020 went to Iceland here because it was one of the countries that allowed tourism.
Yes.
Early on.
Yes. And if you follow sort of kind of protocols and so on and so forth, and testing, because you had this sort of app where they could follow where you were and who was in your midst, and sort of could track who, if you had been infected, then they could notify the people who had been exposed to you in a way. So they did allow, there was some windows of opportunities for people to travel. And that enabled some like recording artists and other people to come and do their thing during that sort of early days of when we were turning back after COVID. Yes?
Who were the first settlers?
Yes, so the myth is that these were these Norwegian kings that came in, so mostly from Norway came in, and then when we do sort of genetic analysis of our population, it seems like we also have a lot of Celtic like blood, so from Scotland and Ireland, and so therefore, the idea was probably that people came in from sort of what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, settled there, and then they also went down. They took slaves from Ireland and Scotland, and came back. So I would say a combination of Scots, Irish, Norwegians is who sort of our sort of genetic ancestors. And those Irish monks as well. So since then, yes, the 9th century. But we, in our stories, in our sagas, we have lots of examples of people who were taken against their will and taken to Iceland from the various coasts of Scotland. And the Vikings, were terrifying in that way. That's what they knew, how to go in very quickly and take and go back. And so that's, I think, the basis of our population. Yes?
It's very easy to find your ancestors, who you're related to. And suppose you're a young couple in Iceland, you want to get married. Are there rules that say you can't marry your third or fourth or fifth cousin or something?
Yes. I think you're allowed to marry a third cousin, I think. But yes, that's there are rules with that. But yes, so I forget, maybe that you're not allowed to marry your second cousin, but third cousin I think is okay. Yeah.
Oh, good. We're all the same.
Yeah, yes. Yes?
Could you speak some more Icelandic, maybe not so fast as you?
Oh, sorry, yes. What do you want me to say?
Maybe the little poem.
Yes.
Do you have a pledge of allegiance?
No? Okay, I'll read this little poem. Tækifærið gríptu greitt, giftu mun það skapa, járnið skaltu hamra heitt, að hika sama og tapa. So this means you should seize the opportunity, especially since that will lead to something good. You should hammer the iron while it's hot. Járn is iron, hamra, the third line is hammer, heitt is hot. You should hammer the hot iron while it's hot. Að hikara sama tapa, to hesitate is the same as to lose, or to lose out. So if you hesitate on an opportunity, you will lose out of it. So this.
Are there bonds with the Norwegian language?
Yes. So you would have to learn it, you can't just sort of pick it up, but it's very easy for us to learn Norwegian. It's basically like if you're a Spanish speaker to learn French or Italian.
Or for us to learn Southern.
Yes, Southern English. And because it's also relatively easy for us to learn English, because English is also a Germanic language. But our language is more complicated than English because we have genders. We have female, neutral, and feminine, masculine, feminine, and neutral for all objects. And then we have 4 cases, and they all have to agree. And so grammatically, it's much more complicated than the other countries. And because because I think those other languages simplified themselves, whereas we stayed in that sort of very complicated realm. And when Icelanders speaking talking in Europe in a cafe somewhere, when people hear us, they often think that we're Dutch, because we sort of have sort of like a hard, and it doesn't sound as sort of musical as Swedish or Norwegian. It's more Germanic, I guess, in a way. Yes.
I think it's interesting you saying that it's so related, because I'm Swedish. And
Yes.
I speak Swedish and Danish. And
Yes.
my sister lives in Iceland. We spent a lot of time there. I do not understand a word.
Yes.
Yeah, but just even listening or seeing it written. I hammer and hate.
Yes. Yes.
I just thought it had a different root.
Yeah. No, it is the same root. Yes, yeah. And so, for example, the sagas that we can read, your ancestors from the 10th century would have been able to read that. And then just because of the development of your language, then you sort of went a little bit away. So it's basically branches of the same tree.
And I think it is a wonderful thing how you have Turbla and Sini and all
Yes.
that. Because when I go to Sweden, I mean, my brother who's worked somewhat in tech, we're speaking half English.
Yes.
I mean, it's just
Yes.
bad.
Yes, exactly.
We have Swedish words for
Yes.
a lot.
Yeah, no. And
English is a language of business now worldwide.
yes, no, of course, and people do, and so therefore it has sort of impacted these workplaces and the language. Yes?
Can I ask you that this particular letter which goes around and the slash on top?
Yeah, that's like in the first word.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a sound. Like it's like T. Yeah, sort of like a th. It's like T. And then the like if I show you my name here, let's see where's the names. Oh, I'm going.
Or is it a strange symbol that will
Yes, we have a few letters that are slightly different. Like in my name here, my middle name, that looks like a P. That's like Þorkell means the man of Thor. So it's, that P looks like it's a TH sound. So my name is Magnús. So Magnús, that line indicates like that. Þorkell. And that's an usual way of sounding. Two L's like Sæll, Þorkell. And then,
what is that letter?
and then Bernhard is a softer.
This letter.
Yeah, that's a TH, like Thor. Yeah, Þorkell.
Did you say your last name?
Bernhardsson.
Yes. Do you have long vowels and short vowels?
No,
No.
no.
So why is the dash?
Just yes, instead of just give emphasis on the U, and then you also have
I have it done. I'm Hungarian and we have long and short vowels.
yes. Is this more like an emphasis on?
And then I have one more question.
Sure.
Since you named the child after the father,
Yes.
so what happens the woman has a child that has no father?
Yes. So now people do no longer follow the system completely, and so in the old days they would say somebody was Hans' daughter or Hans' son, his son. Hans is a name, like Hans, but it also means his, and so it's like Veig, whose son it was. These days, more and more people are naming the child after the name of the mother and the father. So it would have been Magnús Rannveigar or Bernhardsson, but that's very long and very cumbersome. Or if you're a single mother, people just name their child after themselves, the woman. And so you see that more and more. And at first that was sort of odd, but now people don't, now it's so common. And for example, one of our best soccer players, he grew up by the single mother, and his name was Heiðar Vilmundarson or something. And then once he became a professional, because his father has not been in his life, he said, why should I be named after my father? So he changed his name to Heiðar Helguson, because his mother's name was Helga. And that soccer place sort of opened it up, and now more and more people are naming their kids, or especially single mothers, or are naming their kids after their mother or something of that nature. But naming, in some cultures, naming people after somebody who's alive is often a taboo, but we often have names go in the same family. Like I named our son, when he was born, he's named after his grandfather. So my son is Bernhardur Magnússon, so I named him after my father. And in English you have the word namesake, and that's my namesake. When you say in Icelandic nafni, somebody's your namesake, you really, that's like a special relationship. And especially if it's somebody who's sort of related to you, he's my cousin, he's my namesake, that's like really like then you're in the inner circle of things. And so that's why people name sort of your children after their ancestors, to keep certain names alive, but also in their honor. and so on and so forth. And that makes you also feel like connected to your history. I mean, it's when I go to the cemetery in the eastern part of the country and see where some of our ancestors are born. I mean, they're all basically my name, and then you feel like, yep, these are my people, and you feel connected to it. There's some cemeteries. This is sort of like a uniquely Icelandic problem where you cannot actually bury the people in the ground because it's so warm. So they have to move it to another cemetery where it's not like boiling, because you don't want that to happen to your grandmother. But there are some places where literally you can put dough into the ground and come back a day later. It's like rye bread that's just been baked in the ground, and it's delicious. It's called hverabrauð, or like spring bread, because it's baked in the ground. So, talking about bread, thank you so much for spending the time with me. Thank you.